These are the stories we share around the dinner table, tell in front of the campfire, and listen to on our porch. This is a place where tales are told and stories are heard. Grab your tea, your cocoa, your whiskey, your wine. Welcome to the Storyteller's Porch with your host, Jill Davis.
Welcome to the Storyteller's Porch. Grab your tea, your cocoa, your whiskey, your wine. This is a place where tales are told and stories are heard. Today, our guest is Scott Ohlgren, world traveler, trailblazer, entrepreneur, product developer, and my friend. He is here with us today sharing his story on the porch. And Scott, we've talked a little bit, every porch deserves a good drink, right? I typically have coffee, which is what I have today. What are you drinking with us on the porch today, Scott?
Double espresso with a dollop of coconut cream, also oat milk.
Ooh, that sounds good and kind of fits. That just feels like a Florida coffee, which is where you're coming to us from. And one of the joys in February 2021, while we're recording this, is so many of us have learned how to do virtual recordings. I know you and I have done them longer than just during the pandemic, so they're a little bit more comfortable for us. Which brings us to the question, most of the people I'm having on the first season, Scott, are people I know who I respect and admire their stories. They're my friends. And I also always stop and think, how do I know this person? I remember how I met you. Tell our audience about how we first met and where. We were in Boulder.
Correct. I lived in Boulder, in Colorado for decades. In fact, we only recently moved a couple of years ago to Florida. But I met you through our mutual interest in natural medicine and natural healing, and particularly through medicinal herbal mushrooms like lingji, lion's mane, and so forth. So that was kind of our original connection.
You were a trailblazer back then. I remember you telling me this is going to just take off. You've never heard of these, but before long, they're going to be mainstream. I'm like, nobody's ever going to know what lion's mane is or reishi is. And now you walk in the grocery store, Safeway, and they're everywhere. So you are truly living up to your trailblazer moniker there. And one of the reasons I wanted you on the show is I know a little bit about your story, but I didn't know all about it until we started talking. And you had shared a quote with me, and I'm going to share it here. It is by the astronaut Edgar Mitchell. And this is a quote from April of 1974. 74 was a few years ago. It doesn't seem that long ago, but when we say it out loud, that was a few years ago. He was an astronaut and he saw the Earth from the moon. And this is what he said. You develop an instant global consciousness, a people orientation, an intense dissatisfaction with the state of the world, and a compulsion to do something about it. From out there on the moon, international politics look so petty. You want to grab a politician by the scruff of the neck and drag him 250,000 miles out and say, look at that, you son of a bitch. And I love that that's from 1974. And yet I believe there's a few politicians I'd love to pull out there and say the same thing to them.
Oh, it was a huge, huge quote for me. It happened, in fact, literally a month within my graduating from high school. So that was something it grabbed me, and it became part of the story, that I'm about to tell.
One of the things that we talked about is where you grew up and how you came to this world of living in Boulder and then moving to Florida and everything between there. And it's so interesting to me that our high school years are just such a small portion of our life, but yet they set the tone for the rest of our life. And as you said, you heard that quote during that time frame. And you come from a small town in Wisconsin. And one of the things I love that you told me about is that you had this concept that you pretty much either got a job or went to college. And that's still kind of the same thing. People think we either go to college and get a degree and try to find a job in our degree and pay off huge student loans, or we go be a work-a-day and never really get ahead. And you had that same concept even back then. You did something about it, though. You chose differently when you knew better, which is a Maya Angelou statement of when we know better, we do better. And you are a great example of that. So take us on this journey, Scott.
I didn't really know. That I came from a very small town, a rural town in Wisconsin, population 2,300, and high school was about 104 students. And I grew up in the 60s and the 70s, being born in 56, which means that for many families, the idea of knowing how to communicate with each other was not yet really a thing. There were 5 kids in my family. I was the second oldest. And looking back, we just didn't know how to talk to each other. And we had all these, experiences and slings and arrows pretty much on our own. We didn't have anyone to deal with it. And when you're a kid, that's fine. But when you are a teen, as you start to get older, it can really be confusing. And I look back at that period and I really see how deeply depressed and anxious and full of doubt, and I had no bearing at all. In fact, as I was preparing to tell the story, I remember landing in high school and having this almost out of body experience where I was in, these classes that were talking about history and dead presidents, and then you had to memorize them, and then you had to be graded on them, and then you got done with that, and then you walked into a class where you were learning complex physics and math like trigonometry. And I mean, looking back, I think, if you really want to screw with the bearings of a human being at the age of 15, teach them sine and cosine and stuff that has no bearing on their life. They still don't have any bearing on my life. And yet for some reason, there you are at 14 or 15, and the education system says, this is really what we should be putting into their brain. So, I was just very, very insecure. I had a lot of dread. I was very confused that it was all moving so fast. I could not get any grip at all on, why is everyone doing what we're doing? Why are we doing this? And I just became very, very overwhelmed with it. And back then, as you said, there was this underlying knowing that you either continue on to college or you work at the local factory. There just wasn't any other option. So as high school ended, I dutifully applied because there was no other thing. There was nothing else. My parents were like, yeah, this is what you got to do. So I applied for this next level of school. I mean, I hated school. There was nothing in it that was interesting to me. It made no sense to me. But you just go, well, I don't want to work in a factory and I'm about to be kicked out of the house. So, there you go. And my dad had traveled a lot. He was an executive VP of sales, and he would go to all these, exotic places like New York City and California and Florida. And he was even traveling to Europe at that time. And this is back when flights were a big deal. They were very exotic and only, special people. It was very expensive. And he would come back from overseas, and I don't remember anything grabbing my attention as much as the idea of travel. And he had started out his career as an engineer. Now, remember, we're not really talking to each other. We're not really communicating about feelings or anything like that. But I just kind of thought, oh, okay, so engineers travel. Cool. All right. So that's what they do. I'll just become an engineer. So I started out as an engineer, which is, all the level of logic that I had access to at that point. And I remember going to college and signing up, and I'm really overwhelmed by the whole thing, just everything about it. I'm now on my own, and I show up in these classes, and I remember I found myself in the first week, these classes are kind of set out for you. The path is set out, and I find myself in this thing called mechanical drawing. And we were learning, I'm not kidding, how to sharpen special pencils and learn how to carefully redraw the alphabet. And once again, I remember sitting in that class, and I'm looking all around at the other students, and I'm thinking, I think I'm about to lose my mind, And in that first couple of months, I was staying in Og Hall. Oh my gosh, I haven't remembered that name forever. And it's I'm on the 12th floor of a 13th floor building. And it's starting to be, it's Wisconsin, so it's starting to get kind of cold, and there was some, snow starting and everything. And I remember studying for some tests, and I looked out the window of my dorm, and I remember thinking, all of this suffering could be over if I just leapt out the window. And, you know, that's when I remember that was a big turning point, because I remember sitting back down, closing the window, and thinking, I might really be a failure in life if I quit college, but I can't do this. And I'd rather just go and try something else than be involved in something that made no sense to me. So around the time I had picked up this book, and I wish I could remember the name of the book. I wish I could remember the author, but it was this travel book on a shoestring. And it was by a Polish author who was probably around 30 years old. And he just looked like a really interesting guy. He was him on the cover, and it was some picture, and I think he's in a bus someplace in Budapest or someplace like that. But his writing style was like nothing I'd ever read before. And I read that book like I was reading, it was like oxygen to me. He talked about travel as a way to expand your character traits of things you wanted to embody, such as, what would it be like if you were, confident or amicable to strangers, or if you became really good conversationist, or how would it be what would you be like if you were really curious and brave and broad-minded and positive and resilient? And I remember him saying, I learned how to be funny while traveling. Now, at the time, I was not funny. I thought, that's only for comedians or something. And I thought, wow, wouldn't it be cool to say some wisecrack and then just crack up the whole room? And I just became enamored. I thought, I don't know where this fits into my life, but I want to do what this guy is doing. I found it absolutely breathtaking because, up to that point, I mean, it's almost hard to believe that I used to think like this. But I mean, one of the reasons I'm telling you this story, Jill, and why I agreed to do this, because I get that feeling that there's a lot of people out there that don't know this, is that your personality is not this fixed thing. And I didn't know that. I didn't know that you could mold it like clay, with education and skill and applying things. I just didn't know that. And I thought, this is the college I want to attend. This is the university I want to go study with. And this is what I want to spend every waking hour to do this. So, and I loved it too, because there was no acceptance committee. There was no tests. You could just go it and do it on your own. So I really made a decision at that point. I thought, I don't know how to do this yet, but I'm going to do that. And one of the tricks that he talked about that really struck with me is he said, if you want to get things in life, you have to learn how to be curious. And he even talked about how you tilt your head slightly to one side. And I remember sitting there reading the book going, tilting to one side and thinking, that's kind of true. When you really get curious, if you watch monkeys, actually, when they're really curious, they kind of go, and they tilt their head. And I thought, well, I can be a monkey and learn how to be curious. So it was just the idea that you could be curious and start to ask people questions and be brave enough to introduce yourself and ask them questions about their life and their, whatever, their farming or whatever they're doing. And I thought, I want to learn how to do that. So at the same period of time as all this is happening and I'm failing miserable at these classes, in fact, I'm starting to not even go to classes and feeling like I'm about to be arrested and thrown in jail for doing that. Around that same period of time, I was in the cafeteria and I overheard some students next to me. They were talking about what they were going to do in the summer between semesters. And I'd never even thought that. I thought, oh, yeah, what do you do? Because the school closes down, what are you going to do? And they were talking about getting jobs at this hotel up in this resort island called Mackinac Island. And I actually knew about Mackinac Island because we visited there when I was like 4 or 5 years old. And so I thought, okay, use your curiosity skills, And I went up to them and I said, hey, I overheard you talking. And anyways, we sat down and they said, yeah, this is what we did last year. We're sophomores and this is what we did. And we're going to go back there a year. I said, how do you do that? And I'm not doing the thing that the guy told me, And I remember they handed me this mimeograph sheet of like 20 hotels, their contact information. This is back when you actually had to pull out paper and pencil and write individual letters. And man, that's what I did over the next couple of days. I wrote 20 letters or 18 letters to all these different hotels. I put a stamp on them, mailed them out. And sure enough, a month later, like magic, it was like one of them wrote back and said, okay, and actually said, well, what do you put in the letter? I was so naive. I had no idea how to do any of this. And they said, well, you just kind of build yourself up. You're like, what did you do? You talk about it and you're cool and you're willing and you work hard. And, I was just like writing all this down. And they said, yeah, sure, come on, you're hired May 1st. So long story short, I hitchhike. I quit during exams. I quit. I mean, I slowly stopped. I didn't even go to any of my exams or half of them or what, I can't remember. But I hitchhiked the 12 hours up to this island, showed up at the job with my backpack and they said, okay, here's, and they started giving me different jobs to do. And I remember as I was going up there, I go, I want to practice being someone different than I am. I want to start to expand. I thought, I'm going to be brave. I'm going to be confident. I'm going to introduce myself to people. I'm not going to be shy. I'm going to, be someone different. And I did that. And I started to meet all these other people who were coming from all over America and Canada and stuff to work there. And I thought, and I noticed how people treated me different. It was like, oh my gosh, they don't have any history on me. And that's just what the guy had talked about. He says, when you travel, no one knows you from Adam. So you can really be anyone you can want to be. And I just became enamored with this idea of like, this gives me a free reign to just be anybody, to be myself. It's not like I was, being someone fake. It was like I no longer was trapped in the prison of assumptions, of other people's conclusions about me. I mean, to this day, it's still, it's just and it was really the first crack out of that prison that we get into about when people start to tell you who you are and you start to tell yourself. I mean, we're responsible for it. So it was great. And it was just extraordinary. And I had the time of my life. And sure enough, a month into the hotel, a friend of a friend there talked about, what are you doing in the winter? And I was thinking, oh, you can keep doing this lifestyle, making money, learning, and, practicing these skills. And kind of like the world opens up to you. You just got to get curious. You got to learn these skills, And I was still shy at places, but I was building confidence. And overheard a friend of a friend. They said, yeah. Well, last winter, I worked at a ski area. I was a skier. I'm from Wisconsin, and we used to have these tiny little mole hills, we skied. And I thought, I want to be a ski bum. So, approach them and talk to them. They say, oh yeah, here's the place I went to here. And you could stay at my place if you want for the first couple of days till you get yourself settled. I'm like, that poor person, they had no idea I was about to knock on their door, come September, October, when I hitchhiked out there. I had no car. I didn't have enough money. The money I saved, I was using to, build whatever I was going to build next. So there I am in the next fall. I've hitchhiked out to Breckenridge, Colorado. I hitchhike every day up to the top of the ski area and apply for work there. I finally get work there. I follow that up in the summer, working as a custom cutter for the fields throughout, starting in Texas, going up into Nebraska and all the way up into Montana, working with these farmers. I mean, it was just incredible. And that next winter, I got a job at a different ski area, and it was a ski area called Lake Eldora, which at the time was one of the few, it still is, I don't think they're even doing anymore, but it was one of the few places where you could ski at night. And if you've never skied at night, it's amazing. There's lights and it's like magical. Well, I got the job as opening up. And this is the other thing too. I was going, oh my God, I'm like a manager. I'm like 19 years old, 20 years old. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm a manager now. I could open and close this ski shop where at nighttime around 5:00 after work, all these families and couples and teenagers and college students would come up to the hill and we'd fit them with skis. And then they'd go off and ski. And for 3 hours, we would just sit there in the shop and, talk and with other people. And well, during that time, an older gentleman, 31 years old, he was exactly 10 years older than me, named Carl, came in and applied for the work. And he was obviously very confident and knew what he was doing. And Carl turned out to be a turning point in my life. And it was because I soon after the first couple of days, you've got nothing to do. It's just me and Carl. We're sitting there after we fit everybody out. I could see he was very, very effective at whatever he was applying himself. And I said, what do you do? Where are you from? And all that kind of stuff. And I soon find out that he had just himself gotten off of a 3 to 4 year hitchhiking trip around the world. I was flabbergasted. And I ended up interviewing Carl. I mean, paper and pencil, taking notes, interviewing Carl about every aspect of travel. And I discovered that Carl was the real deal. He was like me, he was like the Polish author. He wanted to go way out there, away from travels, making, barely, above the surface, inventing it as he goes. I mean, this is a guy who, remember, this is the mid 70s, and he found himself in Madagascar. Madagascar at the time was impossible. It was a communist country. The borders were sealed, and he figured out a way to get on there onto a boat and lived on a beach eating, coconuts and hanging out with the locals for 2 months with a girlfriend that he found somewhere along the way. I was like, this is the life I want. And I would interview him about every single detail. He would, like people tell stories, they kind of do the broad stroke. And I would say, whoa, whoa, whoa. And then like the next night, as we're, after everyone's left the ski shop, I go, hey, I want you to go back to that time that you got cornered by that gang of guys that wanted to take your girlfriend's money. What did you do? So what did you say? And then how did you do that? And where did you position yourself? And then when you say you got on that boat and sailed to the island of Mauritius and then the island of Reunion, how did you do that? Like, where did you talk and where did you find the job and how did you get that? And I thought you couldn't work when you were overseas unless you had a work permit, and he was just someone who constantly was figuring a way to not listen to the standard protocols of like, well, you can't go there because of this. And he would go, okay, so that's the standard protocol, but maybe there's a way. And he would find a way. And I wanted to be that guy. I wanted to be that guy that could figure out how to be so resourceful and, do that. So for the entire season, I interviewed him and we became really good friends because I'll tell you, if you want to learn how to make friends, become curious. People want someone to hear them. I mean, hear them. Like, ask details, not just, oh, you told me that, now I'll move on to the next thing, but actually get curious. And I was honestly curious. I was taking notes. And so at the end of the ski season, we thought, we made some money. I had bought a van by then. Oh, I love this van. It was so great. 1961 Ford Econoline van. And we fixed it up in the back. He was a carpenter. He knew how to do stuff. So I was learning how to, do stuff with him. And we took a week trip, what I thought was going to be a week trip up into Wyoming. Well, while we were there, this is now, what is it? 1977, bring us up. I'm now 21 years old. And while we were there, we stopped off at a town where he knew someone. This is a rough and tumble, one of those, weed-filled towns, but it was perfect for me. I look back now and I think, boy, what a dirty, kind of rough and tumble. It was filled with the oil workers and all that, and I mean, houses were being built, and it was during a period where it was, growing like crazy. And we met the friend, and the friend we saw him at a job, and he said, before we said goodbye, he said, hey, do you guys want a job? We really need carpenters. We'll need carpenter help us. And I was like raising my hand. I was going, I'll do that. And so after the trip, I went back up there, got a job as a carpenter's helper. And as within weeks, I realized this is my way. This is my way. I'm going to build my nest egg so that I can be Carl. I can be the Polish author. I can do it this. I'm going to figure this out. Within weeks, I was up there, and I was a carpenter's helper. Now, I will say, a month later, I actually got fired from my first job. And the reason I got fired was because I really didn't know how to be a good worker. And what that means is that they would tell me what to do and I'd do it. And then I would just kind of like, okay, I did that. And then I would sit there. And you can't do that in almost any line of work. And they fired me. And I was so embarrassed and so infuriated. And I remember, I'm not a big drinker at all, still I'm not, but I was there that night at the local place where all the carpenters hung out, and I'm just so sitting at the bar, and my friends are really feeling sad for me. But one of the guys, one of the older, 8 years older than me or something, and he said, "Listen, Scott, I get you're going to be good at this, and I'm about to break off and do my own crew. If you want, you can come work with me. I'll just got to tell you, I can see you want to work, but I'll just tell you, as you're working, you got to think 2 steps ahead of everybody. That's the whole way the life works. That's the whole way. I mean, it's from cleaning up kitchens to making beds to, building a house. You have to be thinking and put your head into the game." And I remember looking at John and saying, "I'm going to become the best worker you ever hired." And I did. And I mean, within days, it was like the lights came on and I could feel generations of Ohlgren men behind me going, "That's it, boy. That's how you create a great work ethic." And I did. I really got it, like overnight. Just boom, it all came down from me. And I'm like, oh my God, I get how to be and within 6 months, I was leading crews to do remodelings on houses there. And within about 6 months, I found a really old house that I could buy for, I think, $12,000. And I proceeded over the next year and a half, 18, 19 months, to fix it up. I didn't have much money, so I had to, get a little bit every day, would do something, but I'd work hours after long days of carpentry. I would fall asleep like exhausted, but this is my way. I'd figured out that, look, you can work for 1 hour and get paid for an hour, or you can do something that invests into something that will have bigger returns than any hourly rate. And I got that somewhere along the way. I figured out you've got to invest in something so that you can create something with a multiple effect. And sure enough, 18 months later, I sold that house for $36,000, and I walked out of that bank with $15,500.
Thank you for joining us on our first 2-part episode for the Storyteller's Porch. Come back for our next episode. I'm excited to see what happens to Scott, and I hope you are too. What will happen? Will he fulfill his dreams? Will he go incredible places? Or will it have a totally different ending? Either way, it's a great story. And here at the Storyteller's Porch, we believe we are the stories we share. Keep living your story. And meet us next time for the rest of Scott's exciting story here on the porch. And be sure to bring your favorite drink.
To learn more about our storytellers and our host, Jill Davis, you can find their bios and their social media links at thestorytellersporch.com. To make sure you hear every story with us on the porch, follow us on Apple Podcast, Spotify, Google Podcast, Stitcher, and wherever you hear your favorite shows. We'll see you next time here on the porch, where I'll be drinking some iced coffee and cream. What drink will you bring?